This is Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 544, entitled Categories of Women Whom Masculists Hate: Manslavers, Divorce Rapists, Fatherhood Forcers, and an acronym Ms. Dandruff. Description: when a masculist has only a few seconds to make the point to a cynical, impatient, monoconscious feminist that in reality women oppress men worse than vice versa, and she challenges him to prove it, then he needs to be able to rattle off the big 3 gender crimes that women commit against men. That is manslavery, divorce, rape, and forced fatherhood. This flyer provides a mnemonic to remember easily this list of the big 3. The flyer itself. Categories of women whom masculists hate: manslavers, divorce rapists, fatherhood forcers, and then an acronym Ms. Dandruff, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I've noticed with my own girlfriend, with whom I have a LAT, L-A-T, that's living apart together relationship, in brackets, that is 4 days 3 nights together and 3 days 4 nights apart in our separate dwellings, that she has been so brainwashed with her monoconscious feminism, in brackets, equals one has only had one's feminist consciousness raised, for the past 6 decades, that she is quite intolerant to the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, given that many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. For example, for masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is rather small beer in comparison with women's decades-lasting man-slavery. To masculists, man-slavery is the greatest of all gender crimes in either direction, in brackets, that is, by men onto women or by women onto men, close brackets. This intolerance of hers, which is typical of nearly all feminists, usually means in practice that when a masculist is confronted with the cynicism and contempt of a monoconscious feminist, he usually has only a few seconds to make a cutting, jaw-dropping remark that will cause her to stop in her tracks. So I've been stewing lately on just what a good masculist remark might be that would force women, monoconscious feminists, to prick up their ears and listen. So if you're a masculist and you find yourself in the situation as above, with a monoconscious feminist, and you're trying to persuade her that gender oppression is a two-way street, and she challenges you to prove it, and you sense you only have a few seconds to make your point before she chops you off with a typical feminist misandrist remark, then you had better have something rather pithy. So I dreamt up the following. You can get your masculist point across by giving a monoconscious feminist a real taste of how women oppress men, by listing quickly 3 of the worst ways that women oppress men, which in my view are: 1. Manslavery. 2. Divorce, rape. 3. Forced fatherhood. So a woman who commits one or more of these major, decades-lasting gender crimes against a man would be labelled a 1. Manslaver. 2. Divorce rapist. 3. Fatherhood forcer. I found in practice that listing these three quickly in the few seconds you have before her patience runs out is not easy. Your point is lost if you hesitate trying to remember the three things. So I dreamt up a mnemonic to remember them that is quite effective, for me at least. It is Ms. Dandruff, pronounced Ms. Dandruff. I remember this term, in fact this name, by picturing in my mind's eye a young woman who has bad dandruff that she is constantly brushing off her shoulders. That particular image sticks in my mind. By dropping off the middle syllable, that is Dan, you are left with Ms. Druff, which splits into MS, DRFF, that is manslaver, divorce rapist, and fatherhood forcer. If you rattle out these three in quick succession, then the monoconscious feminists whom you are trying to persuade that gender oppression is a two-way street will probably think that you know what you're talking about, since these three major gender crimes that women commit against men just rattled off your tongue as though they are common knowledge and are well-known terms. Of course, that is the aim and the intention, to get her to think that. You could say something like, quote, well, women are manslavers, divorce rapists, and fatherhood forcers. Those are the big three gender crimes that women commit against men that last for decades, making them more serious than rape, for example. End quote. Now that the woman has been presented with these three labels, these big three ways that women oppress men, then you can challenge her with the question, quote, do you know what these three things mean? If she hesitates, then you have your opportunity to expand a bit, unpacking the list with a bit more detail. For example, quote, manslavery is when a woman does not bother to FIP up, in brackets, become a FIP equals financially independent person, close brackets, by not bothering to get a career competent education, so that she ends up with a fluffy crap diploma, in brackets, because she chose to study fluffy crap majors at high school and college that the economy doesn't value. So she then looks around for some gullible, ignorant, in brackets, of masculist and MGTOW ideas, manslavable man, to work for her for decades of his life. Thus she manslaves him for decades, a major and hated gender crime that women commit against men. A quarter of women who become mothers will divorce him, dragging him through the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court system and have him financially butchered, usually referred to as being divorce raped, making her a divorce rapist, forcing her ex-husband to lose custody of his kids, to lose his house to her so she can raise her kids in it, to lose half his wealth and stuff to her, be forced to make child payments to his kids whom he will barely be allowed to see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, in brackets, equals traditional woman who expects to live off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life, close brackets, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life. Masculists have a hatred of divorce rapists, who are usually manslavers before the divorce. The third major gender crime that women commit against men, that also lasts decades, is forced fatherhood, making her a fatherhood forcer, forcing him to pay for a kid for decades of his life that he never wanted in the first place. This forced fatherhood usually occurs in one of two ways, that is, via pill lying or paternity fraud. With pill lying, usually the woman, often in her 30s, with her biological clock ticking hard, wants to get pregnant, but he doesn't want to be a father. So she lies to him about taking the pill, when in reality she isn't. She gets pregnant, then forces him to pay for the kid. Women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right, but men don't have the PARA, paternity rejection right. So women have the legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy, but men don't, which is the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists. So he is then forced to work for decades to pay for a kid he never wanted in the first place, a massive gender crime by her against him. The other form is when she lies to him that the baby growing in her is his, when she knows that the father is another man. For example, when the husband is not the father, which happens, according to a recent UK study, in 1% of pregnancies in the upper middle class and in about 30% of pregnancies in the lowest socioeconomic class. So again, the man is forced to pay for a kid that he didn't want, a major gender crime against men by women that lasts decades. These are the big three gender crimes that women commit against men. But there are others, for example, false rape accusations, female dominance of the schools, especially in primary school, women's misandry, behaving as though gender oppression is a one-way street, when it is clear from the above and to Masculists that women oppress men far worse. Masculists want the establishment of GECs, GECs, that's gender equality committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally. The masculist half will then push for the legislation of the PARA and the OPTAB, OPTAB, that's obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, so as to block paternity fraud. The husband, who is not the father, can then use the PARA so as not to pay for the kid. And if he has proof that his wife/girlfriend has committed paternity fraud against him, he can prosecute her, putting her behind bars for years, where she is forced to work for her keep and for her baby in prison. The masculine half of the GECs will also reform the divorce courts, bringing in a principle of financial independence, by pushing hard the fipping of women in society. A FIP woman does not manslave and divorce rape a man. Masculists get really pissed at monoconscious feminists who know nothing about masculism, who feel they have the right as feminists to be publicly misandrist. Now that masculists are intellectually armed with masculist ideas, for example, the big three, we have no patience nor tolerance with women whom we label as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, or SHBers, that's SHBRS, pronounced shibbers, sexist, hypocritical bigots. Because masculists see the misandry of monoconscious feminists as hypocritical, given that women oppress men worse. Most feminists have great difficulty accepting the idea that women oppress men worse and remain close-minded to that idea, which causes masculists to see them as bigots. As the level of anger and hatred coming from the masculists against these massive gender crimes committed by women against men increases, then those feminists who remain monoconscious and publicly misandrist will have their fucking heads bitten off. They will be severely punished by the masculists, who in time, as masculist and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet, will be most men, by being forced into manlessness, hence lovelessness, sexlessness, babylessness, and forced to rot on a shelf. Masculists will not go near such women, not even pump and dump them. Masculists will be far harsher with MFBs than feminists were to men, since men are a lot more aggressive and smarter. When men become collectively angry and hateful at women, that is, at the categories of women who oppress men for decades of men's lives, in brackets, that is, the manslavers, the divorce rapists, the fatherhood forcers, close brackets, then God help women. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 540 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.